The great hall of the Moonrise Court had seen 300 years of ceremony. It had never seen a plain gray wolf spit an alpha's rejection back into his teeth. But that comes later. Let me take you back 3 days, before the marble floor, before the gasps, before a woman named Rena Silvermane learned that the moon goddess had either blessed her or damned her, and honestly for most of that week she couldn't tell which. 3 days earlier she was just Ren. Ren. Ashfell they called her then, though the name was borrowed, the way everything in her life was borrowed. Borrowed clothes, borrowed roof, borrowed mother. She lived in the Ashfell Pack out on the far border where the maps gave up and the good soil ran thin. It was the kind of place the kingdom forgot on purpose. A settlement stitched together from rogues and rejects and old wolves nobody else wanted. The forgotten edge of a forgotten territory. And Ren fit right in. At 22, she had never shifted into anything larger than an ordinary wolf. Gray fur, plain as ash. No golden bloodline shimmer, no special gift, no moment where the elders looked at her twice. Her wolf was small and quiet and gray, and so was she, and she had made a kind of peace with that. The peace you make when you stop expecting the world to notice you're alive. Except somebody had always noticed. Old Petra. Petra Crane was the oldest wolf in the pack, so old the pups thought she'd been born before the moon. She'd lost a leg decades back to a trap nobody would talk about, and she got around on a carved walking stick worn smooth by her own hands. She smelled like wood smoke and dried lavender. And when Ren was small, 5 years old, freshly orphaned, dropped into the pack like a stray, the current washed up. It was Petra who bandaged her scraped knees. Petra who taught her which berries wouldn't kill her. Petra who said the thing Ren carried her whole life. You're worth more than what they'll try to call you, child. Ren didn't believe it, not really, but she'd have died before telling Petra that. So there she was, on an ordinary bruised gold morning, crouched behind the cracked kitchen window of the little house she shared with her adoptive mother, watching a line of black vehicles wind down out of the hills like a funeral procession that had taken a wrong turn. "They're here for the moonstone ceremony," her mother whispered. Dagny Hale, pack leader, the woman who'd signed the papers 17 years ago that made Ren her daughter. Handsome in a hard-weathered way, with iron in her hair and something guarded in her eyes that Ren had spent her whole childhood trying to read and never quite managed. Dagny loved her. Ren knew that. She just always felt like she was loved from behind a locked door. The king himself. Dagny went on, and her knuckles went white on the windowsill. He does the mate bond revelations, once a year. He's never come this far out before. So why now? Ren asked. Dagny didn't answer, which Ren would realize much later was its own kind of answer. The convoy stopped in the village square and men in pressed uniforms stepped out of cars that were worth more than the whole pack earned in a decade. And at the center of it all, without lifting a finger, without saying a word, stood a man who bent the air around him. Alpha Kalen Voss. Even from behind a cracked window, even from across the square, Ren felt it. A warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. A pull. A recognition deep and stupid and undeniable, whispering one impossible word straight into her bones. Mate. She laughed. Out loud. Alone. A short, ugly bark of a laugh because the idea was so absurd it hurt. Her. Plain gray Ren Ashfell mated to the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. The goddess must have been drunk. Or bored. Or cruel. Except across the square. Kalen Voss's head snapped up, turned, locked onto the cracked window like she'd shouted his name across a canyon. And those eyes, storm gray, the color of a sky about to break, found hers. Her knees went soft. The bond flared white-hot between them, a wire pulled taut across the whole square. And for one heartbeat, one single reckless heartbeat, she saw it register on his face too. The recognition, the shock of it. And then she watched it curdle. She watched his expression shift right there in front of the whole village from stunned to something else, something colder. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared, and what settled over that beautiful, terrible face was not wonder. It was disgust. Ren stepped back from the window like she'd touched a stove. That night at the ceremonial dinner she heard him say it. She wasn't supposed to. She'd gone looking for the kitchens to hide, and instead she rounded a corner and caught his voice low and clipped, aimed at the broad-shouldered beta who followed him everywhere. The goddess made a mistake. 4 words, that was all. I didn't even sound angry. That was the part that gutted her. He said it the way you'd send back a dish at a restaurant. The goddess made a mistake. As if the moon herself had gotten Ren's order wrong and now somebody would have to correct it. Ren didn't cry. She wanted that on the record. She stood in that hallway with her back against cold stone, and she counted her own breathing until it stopped shaking, and she did not cry. Because she was used to it. That was the awful thing. She'd been called a mistake her whole life. She'd just never heard it said so beautifully. For 2 days she watched him. She watched Kalen Voss move through her ragged little pack like a king touring a slum. She watched him charm the unmated daughters of visiting nobles' girls with pedigrees and silver-touched fur and gifts that made the air spark when they laughed. Girls who'd make a suitable mate for a wolf of his standing. She watched him be warm and easy and golden with all of them. And she watched the other thing too. Because Ren had always been good at watching. When you're invisible, you learn to see. She saw the way his hands curled into fists when she passed too close. The way his eyes tracked her across a room when he thought she wasn't looking. The way the bond flared and his breath caught just slightly just for a second before he clamped it down and turned away and found someone prettier to talk to. The bond was real. She knew that now. The wanting was real too. But his pride was bigger than both, which brought them to the throne room. The formal moonstone ceremony. The place where every bond discovered during the king's visit would be spoken aloud and made official or spoken aloud and formally rejected. Hundreds of the most powerful wolves in the kingdom packed into a hall of marble pillars and ceremonial fire. All of them turned toward the 2 wolves standing in the center of the floor. Ren had come ready to lose. She'd told herself the whole way there. Bow your head. Accept it gracefully. Fade away like a good little nobody the way rejected she-wolves had faded for 300 years. It was the plan. She'd rehearsed the plan. She'd worn her only decent dress and pinned her hair and practiced the small dignified nod in the polished back of a spoon. King Osric sat on the raised throne at the head of the hall. How was ancient? Not tired old, not soft old like a mountain is old like something that had watched empires rise and rot and get plowed under. His eyes were pale and clever, and they missed nothing. When he lifted one thin hand, the whole hall went silent. "Alpha Kalen Voss," the herald called, "do you acknowledge the bond revealed to you in this territory?" Kalen stepped forward. He looked magnificent. That was the cruelty of it. Tall and certain, dressed in dark ceremonial gray, every inch the alpha the world had built him to be. He didn't look at Ren. He looked at the king. "I acknowledge the bond," he said. His voice carried without effort. "And I reject it." The words landed like a dropped stone. He kept going. Of course he did. "The bond is beneath my station. The she-wolf is a rogue's descendant of no proven line, no standing, no gift. I reject her, and I ask the crown to witness it so that I may be free to seek a mate worthy of my pack." Somewhere in the crowd a woman tittered. That little laugh. That was the sound that broke something in Ren. Not her heart. Her heart had been breaking steadily for 3 days. There wasn't much left to crack. No, what broke was older than that. It was the part of her that had spent 22 years being small so that nobody would have to look. The part that had swallowed every insult with a nod. The part that believed if she just stayed quiet enough, invisible enough, good enough, she might eventually be allowed to exist. That part didn't break so much as it fell away. And underneath it was something she'd never let herself feel before. She lifted her chin. "Wolf Ashfell," the king said almost gently, almost kindly. "You may acknowledge the rejection, and you will be released from the bond." Ren opened her mouth to say the words she'd rehearsed, and said other words instead. "I, Rena Ashfell, accept your rejection, Alpha Kalen Voss." Her voice came out steady, steadier than she was. It carried across the marble like it had grown up in halls like this, like it belonged, and where that voice came from she genuinely did not know. "But I reject you in return." Silence. Total. Absolute. The kind of silence that has weight that presses on your ears that you could reach out and put your hand against. And then the gasps. They came all at once, a wave of them rippling backward through the hall like wind through a field. because in 300 years of werewolf law, no rejected mate had ever said those words back to an alpha. Not once. It simply wasn't done. It wasn't even a thing wolves knew they could do. Kaylin's face went blank. Not angry. Blank. That flat, dangerous stillness that comes right before something either surrenders completely or tears the room apart. "You can't reject me back," he said. Quiet. Almost to himself. "That isn't how it works." And here is where I have to tell you the truth about Ren in that moment. She had no idea if it worked either. She'd said it on pure fury. 22 years of fury held down so long she'd forgotten it was there, and it had come roaring up her throat and out her mouth before her brain could grab it. She was terrified. Her heart was slamming so hard she was sure the wolves in the front row could hear it. Her hands were freezing. Some small screaming voice in the back of her skull was going, "What did you do? What did you do?" But something else was happening now. Because near the throne on a carved pedestal sat the old law books. The original moon goddess statutes bound in leather gone black with age. And Ren, who had spent 2 sleepless nights unable to do anything but read whatever the pack's thin little library held, had read them. All of them. Because she couldn't sleep and reading was quieter than crying. She turned toward the pedestal. "According to the original statutes," she said, and her voice did not shake, which astonished no one more than her, "any bond acknowledged by both parties may be dissolved by either party. Rejected wolves have simply never chosen to reject back." A murmur swept the room. Down among the court scholars a thin, nervous wolf was flipping frantically through his own copy lips, moving finger-tracing lines. He cleared his throat. Started again. "She is correct, Your Majesty. The reciprocal rejection clause exists. It has simply never been invoked." "Because no one," Kaylin said, and his voice had gone very soft and very cold, "has ever been foolish enough to try." But the air in the room had changed. What had begun as a public execution of a nobody had turned into something else. A legal problem. A problem the king could not simply wave away. King Osric leaned forward on his throne, and he was smiling. "In 300 years," he said, slowly savoring it, "I have never witnessed a reciprocal rejection. Tell me, young Ashfell, do you understand what you have just done?" Ren's borrowed courage flickered. "I rejected the wolf who rejected me, Your Majesty," she said. "Nothing more. Nothing more." The king's smile widened and his teeth were still sharp for something so old. "Scholar, what does the law provide for a reciprocal rejection?" The thin wolf swallowed hard and found his footing in the words. "When both parties formally reject the bond, Your Majesty, it creates what the ancients called severed bond status. Both wolves are legally free. But," he hesitated, "but the party who spoke the rejection first owes compensation." The color drained from Kaylin's face. "Compensation," he repeated. "Equivalent standing compensation," the scholar said, gaining strength, now the way scholars do when they're finally on solid ground. "If an alpha rejects his mate and that mate rejects him back, the rejected party may claim status and territory equal to what she would have gained through the bond itself." The room erupted. Not loud. Worse than loud. 100 sharp whispers all at once, a hiss of disbelief, nobles turning to nobles, a sound like water rising. Ren felt her knees go soft again. She'd been running on rage and adrenaline. She had not thought one single step past the sentence, "I reject you," in return. The idea that there might be consequences. Consequences that landed on their side of the ledger. Consequences that landed in her favor had never once crossed her mind. "You mean," she started and stopped because her mouth had gone dry. "I mean," said King Osric, and his ancient eyes were positively dancing now, "that you, Rena Ashfell, have just legally claimed the right to alpha territory of your own." He spread his hands. "Congratulations, my dear. You walked into this hall a rejected mate. In the span of a single sentence you have made yourself a pack leader." And the look on Kaylin Voss's face. I wish you could have seen it. Ren certainly would never forget it. That flawless, arrogant, storm-gray face watching everything he'd planned come apart in his hands. It was almost worth the heart attack she was currently having. Almost. Because her joy lasted exactly 14 seconds. That's how long it took Kaylin Voss to remember that he was an alpha who had never lost anything in his life. Not a fight, not a negotiation, not a single hand of cards, and that he did not intend to start now. "Your Majesty," he said, smooth again, silk over a blade. While I appreciate the educational value of this exercise, I'm afraid we're overlooking a detail. The king raised one thin brow. Oh. The reciprocal rejection law requires that both parties hold equal standing at the moment the bond is acknowledged. Kaelin's smile came back, and it was terrible. Wolf Ashfell was born into the Ashfell pack, yes, but she is no longer a member of it. Wren's blood turned to water. "What?" she said. "What are you talking about?" He reached into his coat. "And this is the part I need you to hold on to, because everything else in this story grows out of this one moment, this one sheet of paper drawn slowly from an alpha's coat with all the theater of a magician pulling a knife from a hat. 3 hours ago," Kaelin said, unfolding it, "your pack leader Dagny Hale formally expelled you. Conduct unbecoming of pack loyalty. Filed with the Royal Registry this very afternoon." He held it up. "Which means that when you rejected me, you were not a pack member at all. You were a rogue, and rogues have no standing to invoke reciprocal rejection." The floor tilted under Wren's feet. She could see the signature from across the room. Even at that distance she knew the hand. She'd seen it on the papers that made her a daughter. She'd seen it on birthday notes. She'd seen it 1,000 times. Dagny's signature, at the bottom, authorizing her exile 3 hours ago. Which meant it hadn't been a spontaneous humiliation. It had been arranged, planned, orchestrated before Wren ever walked through the doors, while she was upstairs pinning her hair and practicing a dignified little nod in the back of a spoon. Slowly she turned, and there near the back of the great hall, standing among the visiting wolves, was Dagny Hale, crying, silent tears running down that hard-weathered face. But she didn't step forward. She didn't cry out that the paper was a forgery, didn't demand it be struck from the record, didn't say a single word to save her daughter. She just stood there weeping, letting it happen. "The expulsion is properly filed," the scholar confirmed after examining the paper, and his voice had gone soft with something that might have been pity. "Sealed, witnessed, 3 hours and 11 minutes ago. Which means," Kaelin said, and there it was, the triumph unhidden now, "that Wolf Ashfell's rejection carries no weight. She spoke as a rogue. Rogues cannot invoke mate law. My original rejection stands. No compensation is owed." King Osric studied the paper for a long, long moment. His face gave nothing. Wren held her breath and hoped God help her. She actually hoped that this ancient, terrifying king might find some crack, some loophole, some technicality to catch her before she hit the ground. He set the paper down. "The law is clear," he said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "Without pack standing there can be no reciprocal rejection." His pale eyes found her across the hall. "I'm sorry, child. You played well, but you were outmaneuvered before you ever spoke." The defeat was crushing, but it was not the worst thing in that room. The worst thing was Dagny. Wren looked at her again, really looked across all those staring faces at the woman who had found a 5-year-old orphan and promised to raise her as her own, who had taught her to read, who had held her through fevers and nightmares and told her in the dark that she was worthy of love, the woman who had signed her away for a favor from an alpha. "Why?" Wren said. Just that. One word. It came out cracked down the middle, and Dagny finally spoke, barely a whisper. But the hall had gone so quiet it carried to every corner. "He promised to protect the pack. He said if I helped him avoid the trouble of rejecting his mate, he would keep our territory safe. Our people. Our children." Her voice broke. I couldn't gamble all of them on me," Wren finished. Dagny didn't deny it. She just wept. And there it was, the whole cruel arithmetic of it laid out on that marble floor. Trade one worthless pack member for the safety of dozens. From a cold, practical distance it was the smart play. It was the play any pack leader might make. But Wren was not standing at a cold, practical distance. She was standing in the exact center of it. Something inside her chest cracked and fell away. Not her heart that was already ruined. Something deeper. The last thin thread of the belief she'd carried her whole life, that if she just tried hard enough, was good enough, small enough, quiet enough, she might someday earn her place in the world. That thread snapped, and it did not hurt the way she expected. "Well then," she said, and her voice was steady, which frightened the wolves near her more than screaming would have. I suppose that settles it. She turned to Kalen Voss. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Satisfaction, maybe. Or something underneath it that looked almost like regret. She found she didn't care which. Congratulations, Alpha, she said, and she gave him a small, perfect bow. You won. I hope it was worth the effort. And she turned toward the great doors to leave. To walk out with whatever scrap of dignity she could carry. To go find some quiet stretch of border and figure out alone in the dark how a person survives a night like this one. She got 3 steps. Wolf Ashfell. The king's voice. She stopped. She did not turn. She was too tired to feel hope, too hollow to feel fear. Whatever was coming, she'd take it standing. Before you go, King Osric said, and there was a new note in his ancient voice now, anticipation sharp and delighted, the sound of a man who has been bored for a very long time and has just been handed a gift. There is one more path open to you, if you have the stomach for it. Slowly Ren turned back. The right of challenge, the king said. The scholar's head jerked up. Your Majesty, any wolf wronged by an alpha, the king went on, ignoring him, leaning forward, savoring every word, may invoke the ancient right to challenge that alpha for dominance. Single combat. No weapons, no assistance, no mercy. His eyes glittered. Win, and you take everything you would have won through reciprocal rejection, the territory, the standing, all of it. And lose? Ren asked. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Across the room, Kalen Voss answered for the king. And his voice, this was the strange part, the part she'd turn over and over in the sleepless nights to come. His voice was not gloating, it was tight. Lose, he said, and you die. Precisely, said the king, delighted. Combat within 7 days. The challenged party chooses the time and the manner. Winner takes all. He settled back into his throne like a man in a theater box. So tell me, Wolf Ashfell, do you have the courage to issue such a challenge? Or will you walk out that door and live the rest of your days knowing you let them destroy you without lifting a claw? The hall held its breath. Even Dagny had stopped crying. She stood frozen, wide-eyed, staring at Ren with an expression of pure, dawning horror. And Ren looked around the room, at the noble wolves who had never gone hungry a day in their gilded lives, at the powerful alphas born into their strength like a birthright, at the courtiers who served at the pleasure of kings and had never once, not for a single night, had to wonder whether they'd have a home in the morning. Not one of them understood. Not one of them knew what it was to have absolutely nothing left to lose. But Ren did, and she was about to show them. I, Renna Ashfell, she said, and the words left her before her rational mind could catch them and drag them back, invoke the right of challenge against Alpha Kalen Voss. The hall exploded. Half of it gasped. Half of it burst into frantic whispering, and somewhere in the back someone actually laughed, a high, disbelieving sound that cut through the chaos like a blade, because the idea of it, plain gray, Ren Ashfell challenging the deadliest alpha in the kingdom to single combat, was so absurd it could only be a joke. Kalen stared at her like she'd sprouted a second head. You cannot be serious. Dead serious, Ren said, and the terrible thing, the thing she'd never be able to explain to anyone, was how calm she felt saying it. Inside her, wolf was pacing and whining and clawing at her ribs, screaming that this was madness, that this alpha could snap her neck like a dry branch. But the human part of her, the Ren part, the part that was so tired of being small and scared and forgettable, that part felt something almost like peace. This is madness, Dagny whispered from the back wall. Ren, please, you've made your point. Just walk away. Ren turned to face her one last time. Have I? She said. What point would that be exactly? That I'm as weak and worthless as everyone always said? That you were right to trade me away like damaged livestock? She watched her mother flinch. You meant I was expendable, that my life, my future, none of it weighed as much as your convenience. So no, I don't think I've made my point at all, not yet. She turned back to the throne. Your Majesty, I formally request that you witness my challenge. Witnessed, King Osric said, instantly gleeful, and accepted. Alpha Voss, you are bound to answer. Do you accept? Kalen looked around the room like he was hoping anyone would stand up and explain how his flawless evening had gone so completely, catastrophically wrong. Off to the side, his broad-shouldered beta was making small, frantic cutting motions across his own throat. Abort. Abort. She's a rogue with no training, Kaelin said. She's never been in a real fight in her life. This isn't a challenge, it's assisted suicide. Nevertheless, said the king cheerfully, the law is the law. You accept the challenge or you acknowledge her as your superior here and now and grant her the compensation she first claimed. The silence stretched, and Ren watched the exact moment Kaelin Voss did the math. Accept and risk being the alpha who slaughtered a defenseless rogue for sport in front of the entire supernatural establishment. Refuse and lose face before every wolf who mattered. Fine, he said at last, and his voice was tight with fury barely held. I accept, but I choose the terms. Of course you do, Ren muttered. 7 days from tonight, the Moonrise Arena, shifted combat, no weapons. He looked at her, one last opening, one last chance to break and run. To submission, or death. Agreed, Ren said, steadier than she felt, always steadier than she felt. Then it is set, King Osric announced, clapping his ancient hands together with the delight of a man who has just been promised the finest entertainment of the decade. Let the record show, Wolf Rena Ashfell has invoked the right of challenge against Alpha Kaelin Voss. Combat in 7 days. Until then, both parties fall under royal protection. Neither may be harmed nor interfered with by any hand. He rose from his throne. Court is dismissed. I do so look forward to next week. And just like that, it was over. The nobles began to file out, buzzing, thrilled, already retelling the story to each other before they'd even reached the doors. And Ren was left standing alone in the exact center of that vast marble floor in the settling quiet, beginning at last to feel the full and terrible weight of what she had just done. 7 days. 7 days to somehow become strong enough to survive combat with a wolf who'd been bred and trained for battle since he could walk. 7 days to keep from being torn apart in front of a cheering crowd. 7 days to prepare for a fight she had no earthly business surviving. 7 days to live. Footsteps behind her. Soft. Ren. She didn't turn. What I should have done years ago, she said. I stopped letting other people decide what I'm worth. He's going to kill you. Probably. Now she turned and met Dagny's eyes across the space between them and found that the anger had gone cold and quiet and settled into something that would last. But at least I'll die as myself, not as whatever convenient little nothing you and Kaelin Voss needed me to be. Dagny's face crumpled. I never wanted this, she whispered. I thought if you accepted it quietly you could start over. Somewhere far. Find a small pack that would take you in. Find someone more suitable. More suitable. Ren laughed, and there was no warmth in it at all. You mean weaker. Someone who wouldn't make me dream above my station. I meant someone who could love you without it costing you everything. And for just a moment, one traitorous moment, Ren's anger wavered. Because she could see the genuine grief in the old woman's eyes. The regret that had come 17 hours too late to change a single thing. But then she remembered. Standing in this same hall 20 minutes ago, hearing Dagny confirm the expulsion without one word of defense. If you had loved me, Ren said quietly, you would never have signed that paper. Love doesn't come with a signature line, Dagny. What you felt for me was convenient, at best. And she walked away. Toward the great doors where a small knot of royal guards waited to escort her to whatever cell they kept for wolves who'd been sentenced to entertain a bored king. Ren, wait! Dagny's voice cracking, desperate now. Where will you go? How will you prepare? You can't face him alone. Ren paused at the threshold, hand flat against the huge cold door. I've been alone my whole life, she said, not looking back. I just finally stopped pretending otherwise. The doors closed behind her with a sound like far-off thunder. The corridor beyond was long and torchlit and cold, and waiting in it was a grizzled old wolf in the crown's colors, a captain by the look of him with a weathered face that held professional courtesy and underneath it something close to sympathy. Wolf Ashfell, he said, Warden Cassius Reed. His Majesty has arranged quarters for you, the Tower of Contemplation. You'll have training grounds, a small library. He hesitated. Is there anything you require for your preparation? Ren almost laughed at the word. Preparation. as if 7 days could close a gap that wide. But then she thought of something. "Yes," she said, surprising herself. "I need everything you have on Alpha Voss's fighting. His style, his habits, his weaknesses." She met the old warden's eyes. "Anything that gives me even the smallest edge." Reed's brows lifted. "Planning to fight dirty, are you?" "Planning to survive," Ren said. "And if surviving means fighting dirty, then I'll be the dirtiest fighter this kingdom has ever seen." For the first time all night, the old warden smiled. "Now that," he said, "sounds like a wolf who might just make this interesting." The Tower of Contemplation was exactly as grim as its name. Built into the eastern wall of the royal keep, it had been used for centuries to hold prisoners of noble blood wolves who'd done something bad enough to lock away, but whose bloodlines were too valuable to simply put down. One round stone room, one narrow window, one bed, one desk, one chair, and a silence so heavy it made you feel your own heartbeat like a fist against your ribs. Ren sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the moon through the slit of window and did not cry. She had done the impossible thing today twice. She had rejected an alpha. She had challenged him to his death or hers. And somewhere in this same keep that alpha was surely already preparing to end her. She had 6 days left, no training, no pack, no mother, no name that belonged to her. She had never felt more alone, which is exactly when the door opened. She turned, expecting a servant with a meal or another useless armful of combat manuals. Instead, an old wolf stood in the doorway on a carved walking stick worn smooth by a lifetime of hands, smelling of wood smoke and dried lavender. Her face a map of every year she'd survived. Petra Crane. She'd come. All that way. On one leg and a stick and stubbornness she'd come. "I couldn't stop them, child," the old woman said, and her voice shook and her eyes shone wet in the torchlight. "I'm too old to fight for you. I can't lift a claw in that arena." She crossed the little room slow and certain and lowered herself onto the edge of the bed beside Ren and took Ren's cold hand in both of her warm, papery ones. "But I'll be here," Petra said. "Every day of these 7, I'll be here." And Ren, who had not cried through the rejection, nor the betrayal, nor the challenge, nor the walk to this cell. Ren finally broke. She put her head on the old woman's shoulder and she wept while the moon climbed the window slit, and somewhere below them a king slept easy, and an alpha sharpened himself for slaughter, and the whole indifferent kingdom turned in its sleep. But she was not alone. That was the thing they'd all forgotten to take from her. She was not alone. And in 6 days the whole kingdom was going to learn exactly what a gray wolf with nothing left to lose and one old woman who believed in her could actually do. 6 days. That's what Ren had, and she spent the first one learning exactly how badly the odds were stacked against her. Warden Cassius Reed took her down to the training grounds beneath the tower before the sun was fully up. A cold stone pit ringed with old scars where centuries of wolves had bled and fallen and gotten back up. He brought his 3 best fighters, young, fast, kind even in the way soldiers are kind. They didn't want to hurt her more than the lesson required. They put her on the ground in 4 seconds. The first time. The 10th time it was 3. By noon. Ren was bruised from her jaw to her hip, tasting dirt and her own blood hauling herself up off the stone by sheer stubbornness and nothing else. Reed watched from the edge with his arms folded and his weathered face giving away nothing, and every time she got up he just nodded once and sent the next one at her, because that was the truth of it, and he was too honest to hide it from her. She was slow. She was small. Her wolf was an ordinary gray thing that had never fought anything more dangerous than a rabbit. And in 6 days she would step into an arena against a wolf who had been killing since before she'd learned to read. "Again," Reed said, and she got up, and she went down, which is more or less how the whole first day went. And the second. Petra sat on a stone bench at the edge of the pit, through all of it wrapped in a wool blanket against the cold, saying nothing, just being there the way she'd promised. And every time Ren caught her eye, the old woman would give her the smallest nod. "Not you're doing well? Nothing so foolish as that. Just I see you. Keep going." It was, Ren thought, the only thing keeping her upright. Until the 3rd night, when everything she thought she knew about herself came apart. She was alone in her cell, staring at the ceiling, cataloging bruises when the knock came. Soft, almost apologetic. She expected Petra, she got something else entirely. The woman in the doorway was ancient, not tired old, not soft old, but old, the way a standing stone is old, like something that had watched the world change and refused to change with it. Silver hair braided through with small dark stones and slivers of bone. Eyes that held too much. When she moved into the room, she moved like water finding its level, like the floor was hers and always had been. Behind her, Warden Reed dipped his head with a respect Wren had never seen him give anyone. "Wolf Ashfell," he said, and even his voice had gone careful. "May I present Elder Sibylla Thorne, keeper of the old ways, advisor to 3 kings before this one." Wren scrambled up off the bed, because she knew that name. Everyone did. Sibylla Thorne was less a person than a rumor. The last of the old shamans, the ones who remembered magic from before the great silencing, back when wolves had power beyond just changing shape. Half the pack thought she'd died a century ago, the other half thought she'd never been real. Elder Wren managed. Forgive me, I don't know how to properly—" "Child." Sibylla lifted one hand and Wren's words dried up. "In a handful of days you are going to die. Unless something changes and changes greatly. We do not have time for manners." She lowered herself into the single chair like it was a throne. Reed took up his post at the door, and it was clear he meant to stand guard against the whole world if he had to. "I've come to make you an offer," the old woman said, "the kind that could save your life, if you're brave enough to take it." Wren's heart began to pound. "What kind of offer?" "The kind your great-grandmother would have understood." Something moved in those ancient eyes reflecting the candle. "Tell me, Wren, what do you know about your bloodline, your real one? Not the story about failed warriors and forgotten rogues. The true one." Wren sat down hard on the bed. Nothing," she said. "Dagny found me when I was 5. I don't remember anything before that. Not really. Just flashes, fire sometimes, a song I can't place." "Of course you don't remember." Sibylla leaned forward and studied Wren's face with an intensity that made her want to look away. Memory suppression was woven into the binding, but bindings weaken child, especially under great grief, great fear. Her voice softened only slightly. "Tell me, these past days, have you had dreams? Flashes of things that feel like memories but couldn't possibly be yours?" Wren's mouth went dry. Because she had. A woman with silver hair lifting her toward a sky full of stars. A man with eyes like starlight teaching her to call wolves down from a mountain. And fire. Screaming. Someone shoving her hard into the dark of a cave, gasping words about protection and blood and hide. "Little one, hide until you're strong." "How?" Wren whispered. "How did you know that?" "Because I cast the binding myself," Sibylla said. 17 years ago, at the request of a dying woman who wanted to protect her granddaughter from the wolves who would have killed her for what she carried in her blood. The room seemed to tilt. "Your name is not Rena Ashfell, child." The old woman's voice was gentle now, and somehow that made it worse. "It's Rena Silvermane, last surviving heir of the Silvermane line, the moon's crown." And every strange dream Wren had ever dismissed snapped into terrible focus at once. The silver-haired woman singing in a language she'd never learned but somehow knew. The burning house. The strong hands pushing her into the cave. The voice over and over, "You are the moon's daughter. Little wolf, never forget what you are." "That's impossible," Wren breathed. "The Silvermanes are extinct. Everyone knows that. They were wiped out in the purge. Every last one. Everyone knows what we needed them to know." Sibylla's eyes glittered. "Your great-grandmother was Queen Seraphina Silvermane, the most powerful alpha queen who ever lived. She could command wolves across whole kingdoms, not ask, not persuade, command. She could shift into forms out of legend. She could work the old magic call storms down, see through the eyes of any wolf in her lands." A pause. "She was also wise enough to know that power like that makes you a target. So she planned. When the coalition came for her line, she'd already hidden the one child they'd never think to look for." "Me," Wren said. "Numb. You, 5 years old, the sole survivor, hidden behind a binding that would smother your gifts until you were old enough to survive claiming them." The old woman folded her hands. "And that binding is beginning to crack, Wren, which means very soon you'll need everything it's been holding down." Ren sat there with her whole life rearranging itself inside her skull. Some secret princess. That's what she was supposed to believe now. Her, the Grey Wolf, the mistake. "If I'm so powerful," she said, and her voice cracked, "why have I never felt any of it? Why am I still just—" "Because power without training is only dangerous potential," Sibylla said, "which brings me to the offer." She stood and moved to the window and looked out at the moon climbing the eastern sky. "I can break the binding, give you your full heritage, everything your blood should have granted you from birth." "What's the catch?" Ren said. Because there was always a catch. She'd learned that much for free. The old woman turned, and the smile she gave showed teeth that were just slightly too sharp to be entirely human. "Clever girl. The catch is this. 17 years of suppressed power released all at once will either kill you or remake you into something the world has not seen in 100 years. There is no middle, no gentle awakening. You survive the crossing and become what you were born to be, or you die screaming in the attempt. And if I don't take it, then you face Alpha Voss with the gifts of an average rogue, and you die roughly 30 seconds after the fight begins." Laid out like that, it hardly felt like a choice at all. But before Ren could answer, before she could even find the shape of the words, there came a second knock at the door, even softer than the first, and what walked in changed everything all over again. She was young Ren's own age, more or less, and she was beautiful in the effortless way of high-born wolves. Golden hair, fine bones, eyes the color of shadow under a forest canopy. She stepped inside without waiting to be asked, all nervous energy and a body built for grace, and she looked at Ren like she'd been rehearsing this for days. "Wolf Ashfell," she said. "My name is Rhiannon Frost. I was meant to be Kalen Voss's mate. The arranged one, before you complicated everything." Ren blinked, because she'd heard the whispers. Rhiannon Frost, daughter of a Western alpha blessed with beauty and connections, both the sort of perfect match powerful families arrange for their heirs the way they arrange land. "I'm sorry," Ren said on reflex, then caught herself. "No, I'm not. You're better off without him." Rhiannon's laugh was short and bitter. "That's actually what I came to tell you." She glanced at elder Sibylla, hesitated, and pressed on anyway. "You're not the first mate he's rejected, Ren. You need to understand that. You are not the first." The room went very still. "What do you mean?" Ren said. "I mean, Kalen and I have known each other since we were pups. Our families always assumed we'd mate, good blood, good borders, all the tidy political advantages. But when we came of age and no bond appeared, my father pushed for an arrangement anyway, a treaty dressed up as a marriage." Her hands twisted together. "Kalen went along with it, right up until 3 months ago, when he met his true mate, during a border negotiation." Ren felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Ah, Beta," Rhiannon went on, "from the southern packs. Her name was Eloan Marsh. The bond hit him like lightning. Everyone saw it, everyone felt it, stronger than anything he'd known." Her voice went flat. "And he rejected her, publicly, said she wasn't suitable for an alpha of his standing, and she accepted it, quietly, like a good little wolf, and then she went into exile." "What happened to her?" Ren asked, and Rhiannon Frost went quiet, too quiet. She looked at the floor, she looked at the window, she looked anywhere but at Ren, and when she finally spoke, her voice had dropped to almost nothing. "That's the thing I really came to tell you," she said, "and I need you to hold on to something before I do." She reached into her coat and drew out a small, worn leather journal. "This was Eloan's. She left it behind when she went into exile. I've had it 3 months, and I've read it enough times to know it by heart." She held it out. Ren took it. It was warm from being carried against a body and heavier than a thing that small had any right to be. "Read the last entries," Rhiannon said, "and then ask yourself why a woman who accepted her rejection so gracefully, who did everything right, who caused no trouble, who simply disappeared the way she was supposed to." Her voice finally broke. "Why no one has seen or heard from Eloan Marsh in 3 months. Why her family stopped receiving letters. Why when I asked at court where she'd been sent, 3 different officials gave me 3 different answers, and then a 4th official told me to stop asking." The cell went cold. Ren looked down at the journal in her hands. "She's dead," she said. It wasn't a question. "They don't exile them," Rhiannon whispered. "That's the secret. That's what nobody says out loud. The quiet ones. The ones who accept it gracefully and fade away like they're supposed to, they don't fade anywhere. There's no small welcoming pack in some far green valley. There's a system, Ren, a machine, built to make inconvenient wolves disappear so cleanly that nobody ever thinks to count them. And in that moment, everything Ren had understood about the world she was fighting turned over and showed its underside. Because she'd walked into that throne room believing the worst outcome was humiliation, a public shaming, and then a quiet life somewhere far away. That's what Dagny had promised her. Start over. Find a small pack. Find someone more suitable. There was no small pack. There had never been a small pack. If Ren had done what she was supposed to do, if she had bowed her head and accepted it gracefully like every good little rejected she-wolf, for 300 years she would not be living out her days in some quiet green valley. She'd be gone, erased, uncounted, the way Elowen Marsh was gone. That's why he rejected me so viciously, Ren said, slowly working it out aloud. It wasn't cruelty, or it wasn't only cruelty. He needed it to look decisive, public, so no one would ask questions when I disappeared. He's terrified, Rhiannon said, of the bond, of needing anyone he can't control. But that's the small horror, Ren. That's just his. The big horror is the thing he serves. The thing that made rejection so safe and easy for alphas like him that they stopped even feeling it. She stepped back toward the door. You didn't just embarrass Kalen Voss in that hall. You did the one thing rejected wolves have never done. You refused to disappear. And that terrifies people far more powerful than him. She paused at the threshold. There's something else you should know, she said. He isn't planning to fight fair. He's been meeting with a man named Mordecai Ashe, an alchemist, someone who enhances, alpha hormones refined and concentrated. It's not technically illegal, but by the time you two step into that arena, Kalen Voss won't be the wolf you'd be fighting on even ground. He'll be something stronger, faster, barely himself. So he gets to be a monster, Ren said, and I get to be naturally dead. Unless you find your own advantages. Rhiannon's eyes flicked just once to Elder Sibylla, who had stood silent through all of it, watching, listening, saying nothing. Something tells me you're closer to finding one than they think. And then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving Ren holding a dead woman's journal in a cold stone room with the last shaman in the kingdom watching her from the shadows. Ren didn't want to open it. She wanted to hate Kalen Voss cleanly, simply the way you hate a storm or a wildfire. It was easier when he was only a villain, but she opened the journal anyway because easier wasn't going to keep her alive. The first entries were happy. That was the worst part. Met my mate today. The bond hit like lightning. I've never felt anything so strong. He seemed just as struck. But there was something in his eyes underneath it. Fear, almost. Why would an alpha fear his own mate? And then a few pages on, I keeps finding reasons not to be alone with me. When we are together, he's charming but distant, like he's playing a part instead of being a man. I catch him watching me sometimes. The hunger in it makes my wolf ache. And then he looks away and turns to stone. And near the end, I understand now. He isn't afraid of me. He's afraid of how much he wants me. He told me tonight that an alpha can't afford to need anyone more than they need him. As though love were a debt. As though I were a weakness he couldn't allow himself. And the last one, in a shakier hand, he's going to reject me. I can see it coming in the way he talks about duty and suitable matches. Part of me wants to fight for what we have, but I am so tired of begging for scraps from someone who thinks love is a flaw. Wherever they send me, at least it will be quiet. At least I won't have to watch him choose fear over me every single day, wherever they send me. Ren closed the journal with hands that had started very slightly to shake, because Elowen Marsh had written that believing she was going somewhere. And she wasn't. And she'd never know it. And somewhere out there was a family who'd stopped getting letters and told themselves she was just busy building her new life, when the truth was, there was no new life, there had never been a new life, there had only ever been the machine, quiet and patient and hungry. Ren looked up at Elder Sibylla. How do I break the binding? She said. The old woman didn't smile. She only nodded slow, like something long expected had finally arrived. Not yet, she said. The moon must be at its strongest. That means the night before your challenge 5 nights from now, which is good, because you'll need those days for something else. For what? To be certain, Sibylla said, that you understand what you're becoming, Power doesn't make you someone new, child. It only makes you more of who you already are." Her eyes fixed on Ren's. "You are carrying a great deal of grief right now, and a great deal of anger. When the binding breaks, both of those grow just as large as everything else. So I need to know when the whole of your strength comes roaring up out of you, and every wolf who ever wronged you is within reach of it. Will you still be the woman who wept on an old cripple's shoulder? Or will you become the thing they were always afraid you'd be?" Ren didn't answer right away, because she didn't know, and she was honest enough even then, even terrified, not to lie about it. The next several days blurred together into something strange. By day she trained, and slowly, so slowly it was almost invisible, she stopped hitting the ground quite so fast. Warden Reed found her one afternoon reading Eloin's journal in the corner of the pit and asked her what it was, and when she told him, the old warden's jaw went tight and he said nothing. But the next morning he taught her 3 ways to break a hold that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with a bigger wolf's own weight. Fighting dirty, she'd promised. He was making good on it. By evening she read the old books Sibylla left her. Journals and spell tongues in a language she shouldn't have been able to read, but somehow more and more could. Her suppressed memory kept handing her words like an old friend passing her notes under a desk. And by night, when she couldn't sleep, Petra sat with her. They didn't talk about the fight much. Petra talked about small things instead. The way the light came through the trees on the ridge back home. A song she used to sing, the name of a cat she'd loved 50 years ago. And Ren understood without being told that the old woman was giving her something to hold that wasn't fear. A rope back to the ordinary world, so that whatever Ren became, she'd remember there was something worth staying human for. "You're afraid you'll turn cruel," Petra said one night. Not a question. "Sibylla thinks I might." "Sibylla's clever," Petra said, "but she's watched too much cruelty, and it's made her expect it." The old woman took Ren's hand in her warm, papery ones, the way she had 1,000 times the way she had when Ren was 5 and terrified and new. "You spent your whole life being small so you wouldn't cost anyone anything. A cruel wolf doesn't do that. A cruel wolf takes. You've only ever given." She squeezed. "Whatever you become, child, you'll still be the girl who tried to be small enough not to be a burden. I'd stake my old bones on it." It was, Ren thought later, the truest thing anyone said to her that whole terrible week. But the world was not done with her yet. On the 6th night, one night before the awakening, 2 before the fight, Ren woke from a dream of fire with her ears ringing and something wrong crawling under her skin. The binding was cracking on its own now. She'd known it would. Sibylla had warned her. And with each hairline fracture, something leaked through. Not memory this time. Sense. Awareness. She lay in the dark and realized slowly with a rising dread that she could feel the keep around her. Wolves sleeping in distant rooms. Their heartbeats. Their dreams almost. A whole living map of the place unrolling in her mind whether she wanted it or not. And in the middle of that map, in the royal wing, a knot of wolves who were very much awake. Ren shouldn't have been able to hear them. She was a tower and 3 walls away. But she could. "Cannot allow a Silvermane to survive." A hard, dry, grinding voice. Old. "You all understand this. If she defeats Voss, she has a legal claim to his lands and his standing. If she dies fighting him, she becomes a martyr that every rejected wolf in the kingdom rallies around. Either way, she destabilizes everything we've built. Either way, the girl dies. But it must look natural." A second voice, colder. "An accident in the ring. A weak heart giving out under a fight above her strength. Silver dust in the combat circle." A third. "I have men among the arena crews, enough to weaken her wolf, enough to make a killing blow land that might not otherwise. And if she proves harder to kill than we expect." That was a fourth voice, thin, ancient, unmistakable. King Osric. Ren's blood went to ice. "Then the galleries," said the first voice, the dry one, the old one. "Crossbows, dressed as rogue hunters. Let it look like an attack from outside. The kingdom mourns a tragedy, and the last of the Silvermane blood dies with the girl, and no one is ever the wiser." They'd never meant to let her live. Not if she won. Not if she lost. The challenge was a stage, and she was already marked for the grave before the curtain ever rose. Everything, the law, the terms, the royal protection, all of it was theater, and she was the only one who hadn't known the ending. But that wasn't the worst of it. Because Wren, straining every new woken sense, she had reached toward that dry old grinding voice, the one giving the orders, the one who wanted her dead most of all, and something in it snagged on a memory. The binding had almost but not quite buried. Fire. A house on fire. Screaming. Her grandmother's voice shouting, "Run, little one, run," and over the roar of the flames a wolf's voice. Cold. Certain. Giving orders in a courtyard full of the dead. That voice. That exact voice. Older now. Drier. But the same. The wolf who was at this very moment calmly arranging her murder in a royal chamber was the same wolf who had stood in the ashes of her family 17 years ago and given the order that made her an orphan. Alpha Corvus Stone. He had killed them all. Her mother, her father, her grandmother the queen. He had burned the Silvermane line down to a single 5-year-old they'd never managed to find. And now here he was again. Same voice, same cold certainty, same job to finish what he'd started. To close the last small gap in a genocide 17 years old. Wren lay in the dark and shook, not with fear, with something else. Something that rose up her spine like heat, like the crack of the binding widening, like her wolf lifting its head after a lifetime asleep. Something that whispered his name back to her, Corvus Stone, and promised in a voice that was hers, and also not hers, also older, also crowned, that he would answer for every one of them. "Let them fear us," the whisper said. "Let them learn what it costs to corner a Silvermane." And that was the moment Wren understood exactly what Elder Sibylla had meant. Power doesn't make you someone new. It makes you more of who you already are. She had 2 days left. One awakening that would probably kill her, and a fight rigged 3 ways to make certain of it. She now knew the man who'd murdered her family, and she could actually feel humming in her half-woken blood how easy it would be to let the anger have her, to become the storm, to burn them all down the way they'd burned her people and call it justice and mean it. It would be so easy. And in the next room an old crippled wolf slept with a walking stick propped against the wall, having sat with her every single day, asking nothing, giving everything, whispering, "You're worth more than what they'll try to call you." Wren closed her eyes. She had a choice to make. Not tomorrow in the ritual, not the day after in the ring. Now, tonight, in the dark, with her whole life cracking open and something enormous and terrible and beautiful rising up to fill the space. Who was she going to be when she finally stopped being small? She didn't have the answer yet, but she knew at last that the answer was the only fight that actually mattered. Midnight came with the sound of a walking stick on stone. Petra stayed in the room. Sibylla had said no. The awakening was no place for the frail. The raw magic could stop an old heart cold. And Petra had looked at the last shaman in the kingdom, 1 crippled leg and 80-odd years and a stick worn smooth, and said, "Then I'll die in good company." And that was that. Nobody argued with Petra Crane twice. So she sat in the corner wrapped in her wool blanket while Sibylla drew the circle. The old shaman worked in silence, laying out things that had no business existing in the modern world, vials of liquid that held their own light, carved bones older than the kingdom, a blade so black it seemed to drink the candle flame instead of catching it. She marked the stone floor in symbols Wren half remembered from a language she'd never been taught. And when the moon reached the top of the window slit and poured its cold silver into the room, Sibylla turned. "The crossing has 3 stages," she said. "First, I break the binding. It will feel as though your skin is being pulled off from the inside. Second, your true wolf comes. This may go beyond any shift you've known. Your great-grandmother's form was not a thing of nature. Most who reach this stage lose consciousness from the pain." A pause. "And the third stage is when your mind meets your power. If it cannot hold, if the grief or the rage or the sheer size of it breaks you, then I will have to end you myself, before you can harm anyone. Do you understand what I'm telling you, child?" "You'll kill me," Wren said, "if I go wrong." "I will," Sibylla said. "It's the price of my offering it at all." Wren looked at Petra in the corner. The old woman didn't tell her to be brave. She didn't say it'll be all right because it might not be. She just held Wren's eyes and put one warm, papery hand flat against her own chest over the heart and left it there. "I'm here. Come back to me." Wren stepped into the circle. "I'm ready," she said. She was not ready. Nobody is ever ready for a thing like that. But she said it and she meant it, which is a different and braver thing. The first cut opened her forearm, and the blood that welled up gleamed like liquid starlight in the moonbeam, and Sibylla began to speak in the old tongue, and the very air started to hum, and then the binding broke. There is no honest way to describe what that felt like, so I won't insult you by pretending. Wren screamed. She'd promised herself she wouldn't, and she did, because 17 years of caged power tore loose all at once, and it felt like her bones were being unmade and rebuilt in the same breath. And with every fracture the memories came flooding back sharp and whole and terrible. Her grandmother's silver braid catching firelight, her father's laugh, a lullaby in a language that was hers. All of it, all the years. The binding had swallowed poured back into her in one merciless wave. "Stage 1 is done," Sibylla said from very far away. "Your bindings are gone. Can you hear me, child?" Wren tried to answer, and what came out was neither word nor howl. "Stage 2 now. Don't fight it." And her true wolf came. It started in her bones. Wren had shifted 1,000 times in her life, and it had always been easy, natural, quiet as breathing. This was nothing like that. This was her skeleton being rewritten, her whole shape reforged in cold silver fire, and when the wolf finally stood, it was not the small gray thing she'd carried her whole life. She was enormous, twice the size of any wolf that had ever walked the border. Her fur ran silver into black and back again like moonlight moving on water, and her eyes burned from within, and when she threw back her head and howled, every pane of glass in the tower shattered at once. Petra in the corner did not flinch, but it was the third stage that nearly finished her, because as her mind reached out to meet her power, Wren's awareness exploded outward past the walls, past the keep, past the arena grounds, until she could feel every wolf for miles, their heartbeats, their fear, their dreams. And their fear was of her word had spread, and half the powerful wolves in the kingdom were camped nearby to watch her die, and every one of them in their sleep was afraid. "Good," said the whisper, the old crowned, not quite hers voice. "Let them fear us. Let them remember what a Silvermane can do." And the whisper had a shape now. It had a name it wanted to say. Corvus Stone. It reached toward the royal wing where the wolf who'd murdered her family slept easy behind guarded doors, and it showed her in one seamless, seductive vision exactly how simple it would be. To walk in there tonight, to take the whole kingdom by the throat, to burn them down the way they'd burned her people and call the ashes justice. Her mind began to come apart at the edges. She could feel it happening. The wren of her slipping, thinning, dissolving into something vast and cold and righteous that would not weep for anyone. The grief and the rage were bigger than everything else now, exactly as Sibylla had warned, and they were reaching up to swallow the last small human part of her whole wren. A voice, not the whisper, a real voice, cracked and old and shaking. "Wren child, come back to me." Petra. The old woman had left her corner. She was on her knees on the broken glass beside the enormous silver wolf. One hand pressed to that great heaving flank, and she was talking. Not commanding, not chanting, just talking the way she'd talked all those sleepless nights about the light through the trees on the ridge, about the song, about the cat she'd loved 50 years gone, about a 5-year-old with scraped knees who'd needed bandaging, about worth, about all the worth in the world that has nothing to do with power. And Sibylla was there too, but Sibylla had gone gray. Because the old shaman had seen it, the mind unraveling, the crossing about to fail, and she'd made a choice she hadn't told anyone she might have to make. "Forgive me, child," Sibylla whispered. "This part I did not warn you of, because I hoped I wouldn't have to." She pressed both hands flat against the great wolf's skull, and she gave. Not magic, not spell, herself. The last of a life, measured in centuries, the whole banked fire of it poured down through her hands and into Wren like a rope thrown to a drowning swimmer. An anchor, a tether, something to hold the unraveling mind to the shore of the human world. Wren felt it hit her like warmth after killing cold, felt her scattered self gather, felt the whisper lose its grip, the vast, cold, righteous thing recede, the Wren of her come flooding back into her own body, and felt in the same instant the thing it cost. Because Sibylla was fading. The old shaman folded down onto the broken glass light as a dropped shawl, and her braided silver hair with its bones and stones spilled across the stone floor, and her ancient eyes found Wren's human eyes now. Ren had shifted back without knowing it, naked and shaking and whole, and there was something almost like peace in that ruined old face. "There you are," Sibylla breathed. "There's the girl, not the storm. The girl." "No," Ren said. "No, you can't. I didn't know it would take it back. Take it back." "Can't be taken back, child." The faintest smile. "This one was always going to be mine to pay." Her hand found Ren's, and it was cold already, so cold. "I bound you 17 years ago to keep you alive. Seems only right the last thing I'd do is the same." Her eyes drifted toward the window, toward the moon. "Tell them, Ren. Tell them what they did to Elowen. Tell them about all the quiet ones nobody counted. Don't let them stay uncounted." "Sibylla, be the girl," the old woman said. "Even with all that power, especially with all that power, be the girl who—" And that was all. The last shaman in the kingdom went still on a floor of broken glass in the cold of the moon, having spent the final coin of a life longer than empires to buy one gray wolf back from the edge of herself. Ren knelt there and wept. Petra's arms came around her, thin and shaking and iron-strong all at once, and the two of them held on in the wreckage while the moon climbed on indifferent. She had her power now, and it had already cost her the one who gave it. Nothing about it was free. Nothing about it would ever be free again. The Moonrise Arena was built for spectacle, not for justice. By the next night it was full. Thousands of wolves packed the rising tiers, their voices a wall of sound that would have crushed Ren flat a week ago. Now her new senses sorted the roar into 1,000 separate threads, bets on how long she'd last. Whispers about the silver wolf, rumors. A mother 3 rose up telling her cub to look away from what was coming. The full moon hung heavy overhead and turned the white marble ring to something out of a dream or a nightmare, depended where you sat. Petra sat in the front row. Warden Reed had put her there himself and then stationed himself beside her, one hand never far from his blade, his weathered eyes moving constantly over the galleries above. Because Ren had told him everything. The plot, the silver dust, the crossbows dressed as rogue hunters, and old Cassius Reed had listened and gone very quiet and then said only, "Not while I'm standing," which was from him a vow written in blood. King Osric took his place in the royal box and lifted one thin hand, and the arena fell silent. "We gather to witness a challenge under the old law," his amplified voice rolled out. "Wolf Rena Ashfell has invoked the right of challenge against Alpha Kalen Voss. Single combat, shifted form, no weapons, no aid, victory to submission, surrender, or death." His pale eyes found Ren across the ring, and there was something in them she couldn't read. "The outcome will be honored by all, regardless of preference, regardless of consequence." The warning was for his own conspirators, and Ren knew it. Stand down, for tonight. Except she'd heard them plan to ignore exactly that. Kalen Voss stepped out from the Alpha's gate to a thunder of applause. And Ren, reaching out with her new senses before he'd taken 3 strides, felt it at once, the wrongness in his blood, the alchemical corruption threading through him. Mordecai Ash's work humming under his skin like a wire pulled too tight, tripling his strength, dulling his mind, turning a man into a weapon that could barely think. So she did the thing they never saw coming. She spoke, out loud, across the whole silent ring before the fight could even begin. "Before we start," Ren said, and her voice carried in a way it never had before, resonant, impossible to ignore. "I'd like the crowd to know that Alpha Voss has been enhanced, chemically, by an alchemist named Mordecai Ash. I can taste it in his blood from here." She turned slowly, addressing the tiers, the box, all of them. "So either he fights me clean, or the crown admits in front of every wolf in this arena that this challenge was rigged before I ever set foot in it." The arena erupted. King Osric's face did not move, but Ren watched his ancient mind work behind those pale eyes, watched him weigh a public scandal against a private plan, and watched him choose, because he had no choice, the scandal he could survive. "The challenge will be fair," he said tight. "Alpha Voss, you will be purged before combat or you will forfeit." And so they dragged Kalen Voss off to the royal healers, and Ren stood alone in the ring and waited, and when he came back he was pale and shaking and sick from the purging, but he was clean. And he was still even clean, even ill, one of the deadliest fighters the kingdom had ever produced. Because here is the thing I need you to understand. This was not going to be easy. They shifted together. Ren's silver-black wolf rose enormous in the moonlight, and the crowd gasped, because this was no ordinary wolf. This was legend walking. But Kalen's black wolf rose too battered and sick and furious, and he had spent his entire life learning to kill things bigger than himself. "Begin," said the king. Kalen came for her throat. Fast, impossibly fast, even purged all that training all those years, and Ren's new reflexes barely turned it, his teeth grazing her shoulder instead of her neck, drawing a line of hot pain across the silver fur. She threw him. He landed rolling, came back low, feinted left, took her legs out from under her with a move she never saw, and suddenly the enormous silver wolf was down on the marble and the deadly black one was at her throat. The crowd roared, and for one terrible second, Ren felt how close it was. All that power, and she still didn't know how to use it, a week-old strength in a body she barely understood against a lifetime of lethal skill. Her mind flailed. The whisper offered itself again, cold and easy. Let go. Let the storm have him, stop holding back. But she remembered Sibylla gone gray on the broken glass. Be the girl, even with all that power. So she didn't reach for the storm. She reached for the 3 dirty tricks a grizzled old warden had taught her in a cold stone pit, and she used the black wolf's own lunging weight against him exactly the way Reed had shown her, and she rolled and heaved and threw him off, and this time she rose to her full towering height, so the whole arena could see her, the last silver-mane silver fire in her eyes, magnificent and terrible under the full moon. Kalen circled, bleeding, wary. The easy kill he'd been promised was gone. This was something else entirely, and he knew it. And that's when the plot broke its cover, because Corvus Stone had never meant to leave it to a fight. From the high galleries a crossbow sang. Ren heard it. Her new senses caught the bolt the instant it loosed, but she was a wolf, mid-turn too far to reach the thing flying at her heart, and there was a fraction of a second where she understood with awful clarity that after everything, after all of it, she was going to die exactly the way they'd planned, except someone moved faster than a bolt. Someone who had been watching the galleries all night with an old, iron-haired dread. Someone who had lived 17 years with a guilt too big to carry and had come to that arena knowing in the deep animal part of her that there might be one thing left she could do to set even a corner of it right. Dagny Hale. She'd come. Of course she'd come. She had sat somewhere in the crowd where Ren couldn't see, and she had watched the galleries, and when the bolt sang she was already moving out of the stands over the barrier into the ring, and she put her body between the last Silvermane and the crossbow's kiss. The bolt took her in the chest. Ren shifted back without deciding to human and screaming, catching the old woman as she fell, and the arena went from roar to horror in a single breath. "No," Ren said. "No, why would you?" Because Dagny gasped and blood came with the word, "I never should have signed it, any of it." Her hand found Ren's face, smearing red. "Corvus Stone came to me, before the ceremony. He said if I didn't expel you, if I didn't hand you over quiet, he'd burn the border camp. All of it. Every pup. Every old one." Her eyes swam. "I chose them, Ren. I chose the children. I told myself it was the only mercy left. But it wasn't mercy. It was a coward's arithmetic. And I have hated myself every hour since." "You could have told me," Ren wept. "He'd have killed you faster." A terrible smile. This way, at least I get to choose again. And this time," her breath rattled, "this time I choose you. Not the pack, not the smart play. You." "Don't," Ren said. "Don't you dare. You don't get to fix it by dying. You don't get to leave me with that." "Too late," Dagny whispered. Her hand went slack against Ren's cheek. "You were the best thing I ever. You were never a mistake, Ren. Not to the moon, not to me. I was just too frightened to say it where it counted." And Dagny Hale, who had signed her daughter away and then died taking a bolt, meant for her heart went still in the ring of 1,000 horrified faces. The whisper came roaring up in Ren then, loud, enormous. "Burn it down. Burn all of them. Corvus Stone is in this arena and you know exactly where. Take the throat of every wolf who let this happen." And she could have. That's the thing you have to understand. In that moment, kneeling in her mother's blood, she had the power to level the entire Moonrise arena. To become the storm, her great-grandmother had been the terror the coalition had committed genocide to prevent, and no wolf alive could have stopped her. Except somewhere in the front row, An old crippled woman was fighting free of Warden Reed's protecting arm, hauling herself up on a stick worn smooth by 80 years of hands, planting herself at the very edge of that killing ring. Not to run, to stand, where Wren could see her. Be the girl. Wren laid Dagny down, gently. She rose. And she did not become the storm. She became something worse for them and better for the world. She became a witness. "Corvus Stone," she said, and her voice filled the arena to its highest tier, calm and clear and carrying the weight of every wolf who'd ever been made to disappear. "Come down." Up in the galleries, the crossbowmen in their rogue hunter costumes had frozen. And among the nobles, one old wolf had gone very, very still, iron-gray, dry-voiced, ancient in his cruelty. The wolf who'd given the order in a burning courtyard 17 years ago and given it again in a royal chamber 6 nights past. "I know your voice," Wren said, walking slowly toward the tiers toward him, and the crowd parted around her like water. "I've known it since I was 5 years old. I heard it over the sound of my family burning. And I heard it again 6 nights ago in the king's own wing, arranging silver dust and crossbows and a lie about rogue hunters." She stopped. "You didn't just try to kill me tonight, Corvus Stone. You killed my grandmother, my mother, my father, the whole Silvermane line down to a child you couldn't find. And then you built a machine to keep on killing quietly every rejected wolf who bowed her head and vanished. Elowen Marsh. And how many before her, how many that nobody was ever allowed to count." The arena was silent now. A different kind of silent. The kind that comes when a crowd realizes it has been lied to for a very long time. "You have no proof," Corvus Stone said, but his dry voice had cracked. "I have the proof standing in these galleries dressed as hunters," Wren said. "I have a healer who purged Kaelin Voss of your alchemist's poison an hour ago. I have Elowen's journal. And I have 1,000 witnesses who just watched a woman die taking a bolt that in a fair fight was never meant to be fired at all." She turned in a slow circle, and now she was not speaking to Stone. She was speaking to all of them. "You were told I was the danger, the Silvermane, the thing too powerful to be allowed to live. But ask yourselves who decided that, who wrote the laws that make it legal and easy and clean for the strong to throw away the ones they find inconvenient. It was the same wolves who benefit from all of you staying quiet, staying small, staying afraid. And then it happened. The thing that no single wolf, however powerful, could ever have done alone." Old Petra Crane at the edge of the ring lifted her chin, and in a voice cracked with age but ringing clear, she said, "I counted Elowen. Somebody has to." And she looked up at Corvus Stone, and she did not look away. Warden Cassius Reed drew his blade and turned it deliberately toward the galleries, toward the crossbowmen. "Crown's law," he said. "Nobody fires in a challenge under royal protection. I'll cut down the first man who tries." A servant in the lower tier stood, then another. Then a whole row of them kitchen wolves, stable wolves, the sons and daughters of rejected mates, the overlooked and the forgotten wolves who had spent their whole lives being told their worth was measured by their usefulness to someone else's ambition. They rose one after another all through that vast arena until it was not a girl challenging an alpha anymore. It was a kingdom of the forgotten, standing up all at once and looking their masters in the eye and refusing finally after 300 years to sit back down. And Kaelin Voss, still in his own blood at the center of the ring, looked at the crowd rising and looked at the dead woman on the marble and looked at the crossbowmen exposed in the galleries, and something in him that had been asleep his whole life finally painfully woke up. "He speaks the truth," Kaelin said, loud, hoarse, to the whole arena. "All of it." Corvus Stone approached me. "The enhancement, the plot I knew. I let it happen because I was told it was the way things are done. Because I was a coward who mistook cruelty for strength." He lifted his head and met Wren's eyes, and for the first time there was nothing arrogant left in his face at all. "She has done nothing but survive what we did to her, and she's still choosing not to burn us for it, which is more mercy than any of us have earned." King Osric rose from his throne, an ancient king reading a room, reading a kingdom, reading the exact moment the ground shifts under a crown, and understanding that the only way to keep the crown is to move with it. "Seize Corvus Stone," he said, "and every wolf in these galleries who carries a crossbow tonight." It was over in minutes. Reed's guards moved, and the crowd moved with them, and Corvus Stone, the wolf who had burned a queen and her whole line to ash, who had built a quiet machine to erase the unwanted for 2 decades, was dragged down out of the galleries by the very wolves he'd spent his life teaching to stay small. Wren didn't watch him go. She was on her knees in the center of the ring, holding Dagny Hale's cooling hand, and that was where she stayed until they came to gently lift the old woman away. 3 months later, the borderlands had changed past recognizing. Where there had been struggling rogue camps, there were homes. Where there had been the desperate arithmetic of survival, there was something almost like peace. King Osric had in the end done what frightened kings do when the ground shifts. He'd bent publicly gracefully and rewritten the law. Every alpha who rejected a true mate now owed compensation directly in the open witnessed. No more quiet disappearances. No more machine. And the first sovereign territory granted under the new order was a stretch of green borderland handed to one Rena Silvermane, last heir of the moon's crown, to make of it whatever she chose. She chose a sanctuary. They came from everywhere. Rejected mates, rogues, wolves who'd never fit the shape they were told to fit. Nearly 200 of them within the season, and Wren welcomed everyone and asked nothing of them, but that they help build a place where a wolf's worth was measured by what they gave and how they treated each other, and not one thing else. It was not perfect. She'd stopped believing in perfect. There were border disputes and hard winters and old grudges that didn't die easy, but there was also a settlement full of wolves who had once been invisible, now building lives out loud where everyone could see. Kalen Voss kept his distance, which was the only wise thing he'd done in a while. Word reached her that he was running his own lands differently now. Fairly, that he'd sought out a counselor for the old rot in him, the fear that had made him a coward in a strong man's body. Whether it would ever be enough to touch the bond that still hummed quiet and unbroken between them, that Wren left to time. She'd told him only one thing the last time they spoke. "Prove it," she'd said. "Not to me, to the next wolf you're tempted to throw away, and then we'll see." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise. It was a door left the smallest crack open, which was more than he had any right to, and they both knew it. She buried Dagny Hale on the ridge above the new settlement where the light came through the trees, the way old Petra always described it. And she buried elder Sibylla Thorne beside her, the frightened mother, and the last shaman, 2 women who had each spent the whole of themselves once and finally to buy Wren back from an early grave. One had done it in a burst in a ring in front of 1,000 eyes. The other had done it slowly over 17 quiet years, and then all at once on a floor of broken glass. Different deaths. The same love in the end. She grieved them, both, out loud. She had learned that much, that grief like worth is not a thing to be hidden to keep from troubling anyone. And Petra Crane. Petra, who'd bandaged a 5-year-old's scraped knees and sat through every impossible day and stood at the edge of a killing ring and refused to look away. Petra lived out her last seasons in a real home at last. A warm room, a soft chair by a window. Wren's hand in hers most evenings, the 2 of them watching the moon come up over a valley full of wolves who used to be nobody. "You did it, child," Petra said one of those last nights, her voice thin as paper now. "We did it," Wren said. "You and Dagny and Sibylla and Reed and every wolf who stood up in that arena." She squeezed the old papery hand. "I couldn't have done a single piece of it alone. That was the whole point, wasn't it? Nobody's supposed to." Petra smiled and closed her eyes and held on. And Rena Silvermane sat with her in the quiet and alpha. Now a queen, if she'd wanted the word powerful past imagining, and finally seen, not for her blood, not for her fur, not for how useful she was to anyone's ambition, but for exactly the woman she had chosen in the dark, in the fire at the edge of becoming a storm to be. The gray wolf they threw away, the one who refused to disappear, the one who taught a whole kingdom that no soul is ever too small to matter, and that the strongest thing a person can do when the whole world has handed them every reason to burn it down is to reach out instead and lift someone up and say the thing. An old woman once said to a frightened orphan on a border nobody remembered, "You're worth more than what they tried to call you. Keep going." And they did. All of them. Together.